Welcome back to Green Rush Live. I'm Josh Kincaid. I'm your host, while Jimmy's in the green room ironing t-shirts for giveaways. With us back is Gretchen Gailey, Panoptic Strategies, DC-based cannabis PR firm. And then we've got Bruce Barcott, senior editor at Leafly, and of course, Christopher Smith. We're going to be talking about some bills that are in the going to be passed either the House or the Senate. There's the SAFE Act and the MOREAct. There's a couple more that you may not have heard of. So Christopher, take it away.
Well, there's a lot going on in Washington, and the reason that I wanted to sort of bring these up in this segment is just because it can really be confusing, frankly, with all the acronyms flying around. Some acronyms better than others. There are 4 bills with acronyms, with names going on, and I think, in fact, I've been thinking that one of them is particularly weak in the acronym space. And I wonder if that shows really a lack of attention, in fact, by the people that are trying to push that forward. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. There are 4 acts that I'd like to just chat through and sort of go through sort of the bullet points, the high level points of the MOREAct, M-O-R-E, stands for Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. That's put forward by Jerry Nadler in the House, a Democrat. We have the Safe Banking Act. Safe Banking stands for Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act. We have the HopeAct, stands for Harnessing Opportunities by Pursuing Expungement Act, and that's put forward by 3 Democrats in the House as well. And then on the Senate side, we have Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, and Senator Wyden. I'm going to miss his first name first, but their unfortunately acronymed bill is called the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, which no one knows how to pronounce. CAOA something. So I'm always curious about this sort of thing, Gretchen, because you're a long time sort of Washington insider. When a group or an individual bill writer puts forward an act like this or a bill, the effort that goes into naming it and positioning it and describing it and making it relatable, that's a pretty significant effort. And don't you think that that's important and can really be effective?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we see this in legislation all the time. A good acronym gets a better reported on, frankly. And it's something that rolls off the tongue a lot more easily. And so people want to discuss it, and you don't feel like such an idiot when you screw up the acronym. So if it's something simple, like Cory Booker put out a national medical bill years ago with Senator Gillibrand, and that was the Holmes Act. I mean, they actually took an effort to, come up with a word. CAOA, I don't know what they were thinking. I think they were maybe stoned. Maybe that's why Chuck Schumer is not getting anything done. Maybe he has finally started to consume. He was a little stoned when he came up with that one. That's all I can think of.
It doesn't stand up. And like, when exactly to your point, Safe Banking Act, what could be more obvious? It just rolls right off the tongue. It's so easy to remember. It's so easy to be in favor of it, really, basically, fundamentally, just based on that. I think it's storytelling 101.
A good acronym also speaks to what the bill is about. So right there, I mean, SAFE, a lot of people talk about it giving, financial access to the banks, but a lot of the impetus behind it was that this industry has to operate in cash. And that is a very unsafe environment for many of these operators and folks. And so that was the hope of coming up with the SAFE Act. Same thing for the HopeAct. It's to give expungement on the state level. So it's to provide hope for the people who receive it. So yeah, some thought should go into these things a bit more.
Yeah, it would really help grease the skids here. So one thing you and I have been talking about quite a bit, of course, is the MOREAct that just made it through the House. It's made it through the House for the second time. The Safe Banking Act has made it through the House 6 times, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And yet they run up on the rocks in the Senate every single time. What is going on? Why can't we get something through?
Well, you might be able to tell which side of the aisle I'm from by my love of Chuck Schumer. But the man refuses to play ball with cannabis unless it's his ball. He is just a big fan of taking his ball and going home. So the CAOA is what he wants to see come out first. He has planted his flag, and he's not going to bring other legislation to the floor until that goes through. I think he knows that his legislation is going to go absolutely nowhere. He doesn't have the support for it. He doesn't even have the support from his own party for it. So I think that will allow him then to bring in SAFE and HOPE together towards the end of the year during the lame duck and get those through. And he will take that as a victory lap, since he will have lost all power when the Republicans take back control of the Senate as well at the end of the year. So this will be his one last ditch effort of we've done something.
Some big issues. Well done. Well done. Yeah, I don't understand. I don't understand the strategy also of, I mean, if you think about these as sort of opposing armies, the Republicans, Democrats, then if you're going to attack on Thursday, I'm pretty sure you shouldn't tell the other side, I'm going to attack on Thursday. And this is what Chuck Schumer has done. I'm going to land my big fat Democratic bill right out in front. He's going to try to put it out there on 420 if he can get it done, if he can kind of button it up by then. But he's announced when he's going to do it. He's not going to bring it on him. He's not going to surprise anyone. And the text is already out there. I mean, talk about an easy battle to fight. It's amazing.
Well, we can continue. So I was going to ask if we were going to continue to see political posturing until something like the MORE or the HOPE Act passes. There's been a lot of Democratic push to get expungement. Is that going to be a requirement before we see anything else?
Well, I think when I say that they're going to couple together the HOPE Act with SAFE, because HOPE is offering expungement. SAFE doesn't do that. So advocates on that side and Democrats, they want to see something done to help with those who've been hurt by the war on drugs. And so this is their answer to supporting SAFE, is if we can put these two together, then we're going to get a little piece of what we want. Cory Booker famously said last year when they were dropping their legislation, when they were put forward the draft, that he would die on his sword until people of color, folks disproportionately hurt by the war on drugs, were taken care of. And his bill is just not going to do that. I'm sure he wants to, but as we've seen through a lot of legislation, and I'm not even talking cannabis, when you try pushing through 500, 600, 1,000-page pieces of legislation, it's very easy for politicians to hide and say, I'm not voting for this tiny little piece of something. And so then the thing doesn't get through. If you're doing it in a much smaller piecemeal approach, you're going to make these guys stand up and say, yes, I am opposed to expungement for folks with cannabis crimes on the state level. That's what they're going to have to vote against if they vote against the HOPE Act, because nothing else is attached to it. Same thing when it comes to safe banking. I'm opposed to cannabis being allowed to bank safely. That's what these guys are going to have to stand up on the floor of the Senate and say. If you give them something like the CAOA or the MOREAct, all they can say is like, oh, I didn't like this piece, so no, I can't vote for that. And then the whole thing dies. Sure.
And safe banking, I mean, just to even as we talked about, putting things in plain language that people can understand. What safe banking about is it partly about banking regulations, but what it really is about the public safety issue of cannabis being the legal cannabis business. We say is approximately a $20 billion business, let's say ballpark. Only in cannabis does that mean that this is $20 billion bills going around our communities, literally greenbacks, because any other business uses a debit card, uses a credit card, swipes, whatever. The cash is immediately in the digital world, but not in cannabis. And therefore, cannabis businesses are targets for crime, targets for robberies. People are being killed now. In Washington State has had many of these issues just recently, and it's been happening all over the country. So it's a public safety issue as well. And expungement, on the other hand, is a way to rectify this long legacy of the racist enforcement of cannabis against brown and black people disproportionately. So,
and expungement would also help to allow these people to enter the industry, right. Because so many states have put forward their regs that say if you have some type of conviction against you, then you can't participate. Which is ridiculous because you're keeping out a lot of legacy operators and people who actually know what they're doing when it comes to cannabis, because they have these convictions on their records. So expungement would allow a lot greater expertise to enter the space, which I think in some states it sorely needs.
And the quality, right? The quality of product, the quality of everything we do would rise. All boats would rise. Absolutely right, Christian. Yes.
Yeah, we're seeing one of the effects, sadly, of sort of geographic distance out here on the West Coast, because safe banking in the last year has become. I think we talked about safe banking for many years in terms of it being an inconvenience for the people at the top of the industry, the folks with money, the multi-state operators, this sort of thing. It is not that anymore. It really has become a ground level issue. Cory Booker may want to die on a sword, but we have bud tenders who are literally being murdered out here. It started in California 2 years ago. It worked its way up to Oregon last year.
Yep.
It's hitting Washington and particularly Seattle and the Puget Sound area right now. We've had 70 armed robberies in the last 2 months. Those aren't burglaries. Those aren't people breaking in with a crowbar. Those are gang, three-person teams coming in with weapons, holding people at gunpoint. We have employees quitting their jobs because of this. Frankly, they are leaving rather than suffer the stress and the fear of undergoing this. But I think that message is not getting back to the East Coast. I think it will. I think this, frankly, this horrific form of robbery is going to travel, and it's going to start hitting Massachusetts, and it will hit New Jersey once those stores open. As one of our writers said, if you can't access banking services, you become a bank. And that's what's in the back room of every one of these stores is a bank.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The only other place in America where there's that much cash is a bank. And then you walk into a bank and there's 2 inches thick of glass and everything is alarmed and buzzard and cameras in every single light fixture. And you know how dialed in those places are. Now, dispensaries have all the security as well, but they don't have the glass, and they don't have.
And banks have the FBI coming after you.
Yeah, they have armed response, and they have the full weight of the government, right?
Yeah, you ever see the Charlestown movie?
Yeah.
Like John Hamm's FBI team is not coming after you if you rob a dispensary.
No, not at all. They could give a shit.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. And there's an article that was written that says cannabis isn't the only cash-only business or business that gets robbed in general. You see robberies at liquor stores. You see robberies at banks. Even though they don't have a lot on hand. I got robbed when I was a bank manager on 420. As a matter of fact, that was interesting. But I'm curious about the impact, though. Let's take a step back and say that the MOREAct does make it through. It only paves the way for interstate commerce. So what's going to be the most impactful bill that's out there in terms of banking and interstate commerce and the impacts of the industry as a whole? Of these 4 bills, what is you guys' opinions about one that's going to have the most impact for the industry as a whole?
Well, I think, frankly, any piece of legislation that were to deschedule cannabis is going to have the greatest financial impact for this industry. That gets rid of 280E. That helps with the problems with the IRS. That helps with interstate commerce. I mean, any bill that takes that on, whether it's CAOA or more, Nancy Mace's bill out of South Carolina, she has proposed a national bill. So is David Joyce out of Ohio. Any bill that really looks at descheduling is what's going to help us financially. If you look at, say, SAFE versus MORE, of course, MORE is the one that deschedules. SAFE does not do that. The one argument that I hate that good old Chuck Schumer loves to always bring forward is that he's keeping the big boys out by not allowing safe banking. The big boys are in. The big boys know how to get around this. They have the capital. The big boys aren't hurting and aren't desperate for safe banking to pass. The 60,000 BIPOC businesses in this industry that don't have access to loans and are having to deal with predatory lenders and awful people to try and finance and get the capital they need to stay in business. They're the ones who are hurting from this, not the big boys. So that argument, that always drives me nuts. So we're keeping the big boys out. Big boys are coming. So you need to put on your big girl panties and deal with it because shit's going to go happen.
Bruce?
I think you're right.
Well, it's interesting. I think that argument that other types of stores also get robbed. It's true, but the key here is cannabis stores do not have the option. I mean, I live in Seattle, and I tell you, over the last 2 years of the pandemic, so many places that I patronize as a customer are credit card only. They're no cash at all. I mean, that started with the pandemic, but it really has taken over. And if a cannabis store wanted to go cashless, they could if cannabis was descheduled, if federal prohibition falls. They simply do not have that option at this point.
Well,
I think I got to bring up a.
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead,
I just want to agree with Bruce real quickly that I think it's an asinine argument that, oh, other people die, so shoot, we shouldn't let these people try and get an ounce of safety. It's ridiculous. That's the dumbest argument I've ever heard.
Sure, and now, as we know, we have 430,000 employees, cannabis workers around the country. Now, we are a significant population. I often wonder too about we talk about the federal government legalizing, the federal government regulating the market. And I often want to ask the very simple question is, do we want the federal government involved in our industry at all?
No,
I think they can only make a mess.
Let it go. Let states, let's just, go the prohibition model. Let the federal government just simply remove itself from the situation and let 50 states handle it in 50 different ways. We'll have strange laws like Utah had with its alcohol, right? We'll have, yeah.
I think that as much as, I'm not a fan of the feds, I think we do need them when it's going to come to consumer safety, when it comes to really looking at pesticides and levels and what's appropriate for, different products. Yeah, I think the FDA is going to have to be involved. I don't want them involved. I would love to see someone else step up and really take this on, because I don't think the FDA wants the job either. But someone is going to have to come up with federal standards for all these states to meet, at least. But to Bruce's point, sure, let's not buy beer on Sundays in Pennsylvania. That was my, whole childhood. Going to the beer mart, the liquor store. I mean, it's all just crazy, which I always thought was hilarious because we have drive-through beer marts, but oh no, can't buy it on Sunday. But let's all just pick it up in your car and chug it.
That's the Lord's Day. We want to buy double on Saturday.
That's right.
I think.
But what about I thought there was that article that you brought just the other day, might have been yesterday, Gretchen, about the agriculture department taking over instead of FDA. What do you think about that?
That's a pipe dream by folks that, this is all going to fall under the Farm Bill someday. Bless their hearts. That's a sweet idea.
You don't want it.
But yes, I can see the argument of cannabis being treated like any other crop, as it should be. It's a plant. It's going to be a commodity just like corn. So it needs to be looked at in that way. But just like any other product, that's made of corn, it has to, meet the standards of the FDA and stuff. It's going to go on store shelves and, actually not kill you.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that way, I love what you said. I think in that way, cannabis is a lot like peanuts, right? Where it's a food item, and it's got a risk factor to some people. Peanuts do, right? So I mean, cannabis has risk factors of some types, psychoactivity, etc. It's not really that hard to conceive of how to actually how to regulate this. I mean, I've been reading through Schumer's bill, and I'm just thinking, boy, there's a lot of extra layers. They want to add an extra layer in the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. They want to add an extra layer in the health department. They want to add an extra layer, and that's why Schumer wants to charge up to 25% more tax on top of what we're already getting charged. I mean,
I don't think when it comes to federal regulations that you can separate adult use and medicinal. I don't think there should be separate rules. I don't even think there should really be separate rules for hemp. It's all the same plant. It needs to be regulated in the same ways.
We need to put it back together in a different way than it really got sort of disassembled in the whole prohibition reefer madness mythology, that cannabis and hemp are totally different. They're exactly the same plant, actually. One, it's like just two varieties of the same plant. One has high THC, one doesn't. There's also a really tall one that's good for fiber. There's a really short one that's good for grain. There's, these are just different varieties of exactly the same plant. We got to put it back in, put all that stuff back in the bottle somehow.
I prefer to do it without government, though. If we can remove as many government officials as we can, put them in a committee somewhere and leave them in that room to talk all they want while we have an SRO, just like the banking industry that has a self-regulatory organization where we make the laws and then they give those to government officials. I'd rather leave the government out of it, FDA or otherwise, and then just let that committee have their own discussion whenever they want. But that's my opinion. Little government is possible.
Honestly, it would be great if we could do that, but I think it's impossible to bring this industry together. They can't even decide on, one way to legalize federally. If we were, as my friends call out in Humble, beyond compliant, if we were actually willing to live by those standards and everyone signed on to something to saying, yes, we're going to do this. If the testing labs did not lie about the levels of THC that they're putting out, or, people going to the best lab for the highest bidder. If you could actually rely on the folks who are trying to set standards in this industry, then we can move forward and do something. I mean, that's what nutraceuticals did. Nutraceuticals said, here's what we want to do. And the government was like, all right, cool. We don't need to make up these rules. You've done it for me. Perfect. But we can't get out of our own way to actually pull that off.
That's a great point. Great point.
Well, I think with that, we got another commercial break coming up, I believe.
Just on time, Josh.
Yeah, I want to thank Gretchen Gailey, Panoptic Strategies. That's a DC-based cannabis PR firm. And then, of course, there's Bruce Barcott. He's the senior editor at Leafly. I want to thank you guys again for being on this segment, talking all about bills in the House and the Senate, things that might happen, might not. We'll see.
All right.
Don't miss this next segment coming up. We're going to be talking with some good guests about the Last Prisoner Project. You don't want to miss that coming up.
Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn, also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.